they talked about Topgolf visit, and despite what it seemed at the time that Jayden was a little upset and his agent maybe was upset, turns out Jayden Daniels was not very upset.
I was cooling because I just left the Giants and flew to Washington.
Okay.
And I mean, I knew all those guys there, so it was like it was like I didn't really trip it. It just felt like a big recruiting visit, was what it kind of was. Like they was just telling me like, yeah, I don't really want like the visit to be all uptight about football. Like they want to, let us have fun, because we've been going through this for so long. And that's something that they took from the Niners and stuff like that and other teams. It was just different because it was 4 of the top 5 quarterbacks there, which, kind of blew up on social media. So that's the only thing that was different.
But you had already knew him from whatever college football, 7-on-7 tournaments.
Yeah, I've been knowing them. I mean, I trained with Mike and JJ all pre-draft. I met Drake last summer, so like we was all cool.
Yeah,
we chilling.
Yeah, people was going crazy, right? Some people was going real crazy.
Yeah, they were. It was nuts. What a funny thing that is going to be to look back on. And years from now when it still doesn't matter.
Or his agent is getting riled up and fans are getting riled up.
What are you doing on Twitter, man?
You should never have done that. Like, come on, man.
It clearly affected nothing. Jayden was the leader. He came out the leader. It was a chance for them to learn. And by the way, it also... maybe it matters because other guys who were there, even at other positions. That's the thing. It wasn't just the 4 quarterbacks. There was a lot of other dudes there that might want to sign here later in free agency for their second contract because they like Washington, because they have good vibes about the Commanders. Cliff Kingsbury, obviously going to be a huge factor in Jayden Daniels' career, starting immediately. Here is Jayden on his new offensive coordinator.
Cliff is open-minded.
Yeah.
Like, he ain't the OC that's like, man, it's my way. Like, we got to do X, Y, Z. Just having a conversation with him was like, man, what do you like? How can we help the team be better? And I'm like, we bouncing ideas back and forth off each other. But I like his scheme, honestly. I think it suits me. And obviously, you got to evolve with the times. You got to be able to have balance, keep a defense honest now, especially with all those athletes out there.
So I was listening, again, these cuts courtesy of All Facts, No Breaks, Keyshawn's podcast with Fox Sports. And I was listening to Mina Kimes' podcast earlier, and she had a guy who I really like, Derek Classenberry, QB Class on Twitter, from Bleacher Report on. And it was interesting hearing them talk about the Commander, because Mina's pod this week was about quarterback fit. And they talked about how much they love it for Caleb because he's got all the great weapons and he's the most scheme-proof of these guys, so they can build something around him, but really no matter what they do, they'll probably be right because he's that good. But with Jayden, the biggest concern they had outside of the schematic stuff, where they were kind of wondering what Cliff is going to do, is the offensive line. And they just trashed the Commanders' offensive line. And I thought they just went too far. They said they think it's one of the bottom 5 offensive lines in the league, which is not to say that they didn't perform that way last year. But I think when you say that, you have to acknowledge that like line performance is not equivalent to line talent. And also they upgraded the talent. So one, the biggest factor in the offensive line playing poor or producing poorly last year, right? So when I say producing poorly, I mean you look at the rankings of pressure ratios and those kinds of things, the things that are quantifiable on paper, and they're really bad for the Commanders last year. I would not ever try to tell you that the Commanders' offensive line played amazingly last year. What I would tell you is their circumstances were crap. That Eric Bieniemy screwed them as a play caller. That he set them up to fail because they and the quarterback, who was a young quarterback who had a problem holding the ball, especially earlier in the year, were so leveraged because of the play calling that they didn't really stand a chance. That running the football, they actually were decent. I guess some of the metrics don't favor them, but like, again, they were top 10 in the league in yards per attempt rushing for most of the year. They just had so few attempts that it didn't really matter. But ultimately, when you have so much drop back, very little play action, your play action's not very, very well married to your run game. You don't have the threat of a run game. You are constantly in bad situations. You don't move the pocket. When I say bad situations, down and distance. You don't move the pocket. You don't throw enough short game or call enough short game. You don't have a screen game that's effective at the level that you should in the NFL, and especially in an offense built like that one, where Andy Reid, the same offense, uses the screen game with Patrick Mahomes at a higher rate than Eric Bieniemy used it with Sam Howell. Like, all that stuff matters when you talk about offensive line performance. And so I'm just not as concerned about the line as a lot of experts who I think are really smart football people are, when I imagine that a lot of that is data-driven. And I would tell you, if you watch the tape, you'll get a little bit different story about the data. That the data requires circumstance. And if you didn't watch Commanders tape last year as a national pundit, I understand. Because if you're trying to watch teams that you have to care about, the Commanders weren't on that list past middle of the season, past the Chicago game in October. So I don't blame Mina or Class or anybody else that is concerned about the Commanders' offensive line. And by the way, to be clear, I am also concerned, but I don't think they're one of the 5 worst units in the league from a talent perspective. And I do think, back to bring this around to what Jayden said about Cliff, I do think that Cliff is adaptable and will build around what he's got. And the other part of this, where this marries together, listening to what Mina and Derek had to say, and kind of this idea of what the offense that Cliff will build will be, is a comparison for Jayden that I actually hadn't thought enough about, that I really like, Ant, is Jalen Hurts. Like, when we think about Jalen, we know his running matters, right? They run him, and his running matters a ton in very specific situations. He's so good as a short yardage back, and you can run quarterback power and things like that because he's so strong. He's thickly built, all that kind of stuff. So he's a different kind of runner than Jayden, but I would say they're more similar than like Jayden and Lamar. Like, the home run threat is the most similar between Jayden and Lamar, but like Lamar's ability to be maybe the most elusive player in the league, bar none, positionally, is just different, where Jayden and Jalen are more of straight line guys with some shake and ability to break tackles. Although Jalen might be more likely to run through or over you, and Jayden might be more likely to shake you. It's just not on the level of Lamar, right? And I think Jalen's obviously got more speed. But I think stylistically how you use them as runners outside of the short yardage stuff is probably more similar. And how you want to leverage their running ability as players. And by the way, their passing profiles, I think, are very similar as well. They're both very accurate. They both don't throw a ton over the middle based off what they've done so far. Jayden, who knows, maybe he can do that. But Jalen wasn't that guy in college, and he hasn't been that guy in the NFL. Much more of an outside the numbers type of thrower. And again, for the same reasons that we talked about with Jayden. Jalen's got, with the Eagles, Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown. Of course he throws outside the numbers a lot. Jayden, in college, had Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr. Of course he threw outside the numbers a lot. But their throw profiles and their running profiles match up in, I would say, better in terms of a comparison than anybody else that I feel like I've heard Jayden compared to. And thus, the way I would want to build the offense is very Philly-esque. Heavy run game. Lean on your running attack, leverage your quarterback's running ability to help that, and then set up the big throws outside the numbers and or down the field to get a bunch of chunk plays and be successful that way, as opposed to having to methodically, piece together drives and have a bunch of throws through traffic over the middle. And then it becomes really relevant that Brian Johnson's on the staff. Like, if you want to use Philadelphia as a model, who better than one of the main guys who was the architect there? Like, Shane Steichen's not available. He's doing the same thing with Anthony Richardson in Indianapolis. But outside of Shane Steichen, like, Brian Johnson's your guy. And I think it's awesome then that Johnson's on the staff and can contribute ideas and execution and all of that to what they're trying to build here.
I'm not going to lie, Craig, you got me excited just thinking about the possibilities. And we
like,
can have a Philly-esque kind of offense with the running backs we have.
Is it the most complicated? Yeah, is it the most complicated offense in the league? No. Is it one of the most effective offenses in the league 2 years running?
Yep.
Hell yeah, it is. Who cares? You don't get bonus points. And this is kind of the thing sometimes when we talk about quarterbacks. In college, it's one thing. It's not that you get bonus points, but you have to try to project through the simplicity of an offense. If you have the ability schematically to recreate that in the NFL, there are no bonus points for creativity. Just score the football. And that's, I think, what the Commanders are going to try to build here. And then what the hope is, as defenses then solve some of these simpler concepts or find ways to cope, that you can get away with some simpler stuff because of extreme skill sets, a la Jayden's speed, and that they find solutions for it over time. That buys him the time to become more adept as a passer at the NFL level, which is the transition any rookie has to make. And then, by year 2, year 3, year 4, you're looking at a more NFL-y type of offense where Cliff has been able to grow it with Jayden together. And that's when you're talking about him reaching his ceiling and the Commanders being ultra competitive. When we get back here on the Team 980, which Take Command segment did we pick today? Oh, yeah, we did pick the juicy one. So Trevor Sycamore is our guest on Take Command. The full podcast will be out tomorrow, including his thoughts on the Commanders draft class. But the topic that I've been kicking around quite a bit with folks around the league, like friends, media friends and such, is why the difference in what Jayden Daniels' perception was among league people versus Jayden versus Drake and kind of the draft scouting world, the media draft scouting world. And Trevor's a guy that, and along with a lot of his colleagues, we had Sam Monson talk about it earlier in the week as well, or late last week as well. Trevor's a guy that had Drake as QB2. So where's the disconnect? And what does he take out of the fact that throughout this process, Jayden seemed to be the guy the league preferred? Is that something that affects his evaluations going forward? Great conversation. You'll hear it next on The Hoffman.
Hey, this is DA, and you're listening to The Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.